The grand doors of the Oval Office swung open, revealing a room steeped in history and power. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation as a leader from across the ocean stepped forward, his eyes scanning the richly adorned walls. The air held the weight of countless negotiations, monumental decisions, and defining moments that had shaped the world. Today would be no different. As the two men approached each other, the world watched with bated breath. Every camera in the OSI room was trained on them, capturing an instant that would be analyzed, dissected, and remembered. The space between them closed, and in that brief moment, there was an unspoken exchange, one of intent, strategy, and recognition. A firm handshake followed, fingers clasping tightly in a display of mutual respect. Neither yielded, neither faltered. It was not merely a customary greeting, but a declaration of strength, of friendship, of purpose. Around them, officials and aides stood silently, their expressions neutral, but their minds alert, analyzing every movement, every gesture. The significance of this encounter stretched beyond personal diplomacy. It was the embodiment of an evolving partnership, a reflection of the relationship between two nations with their own ambitions, histories, and challenges. The grip remained steadfast, neither rushed nor prolonged, carrying with it a message that needed no words. It was a symbol, a statement, a carefully measured act that underscored the balance of power and collaboration. To the world beyond these walls, it signified the coming together of two global forces, each bringing with them the hopes and expectations of millions. A slight nod accompanied the handshake, an almost imperceptible gesture that spoke volumes. It was an acknowledgement of the journey that had led to this moment, a recognition of past engagements, negotiations, and shared challenges. It conveyed an understanding that, despite differences, there was common ground to be found, opportunities to be seized, and a future to be shaped. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly as the handshake finally broke. Yet its impact lingered. In those few seconds, an entire conversation had taken place, one that transcended language and politics. It was a dance of diplomacy, where every movement was deliberate, every expression calculated. The weight of history pressed upon the walls of the Oval Office, echoing the footsteps of leaders who had walked this path before. The significance of this meeting was not lost on anyone present. It was more than a formal engagement. It was the beginning of something larger, a step toward a vision that extended far beyond this room. As they moved towards their seats, the initial exchange had set the tone for what was to follow. The handshake had established the foundation, a starting point from which discussions on trade, security, and global strategy would unfold. It had reinforced a connection, solidified a message, and ensured that this meeting would be remembered, not just for its words, but for the silent power of that very first moment. The meeting had been long, filled with intense discussions that spanned trade, security, and the evolving dynamics of global diplomacy. Yet, as the conversation neared its conclusion, there was a shift in tone, one that acknowledged the gravity of the dialogue but also recognized the personal connection that had been reinforced within these walls. A glance, a nod, and a slight change in posture signaled that the formalities of negotiation were giving way to something more symbolic. There was a shared understanding that what had transpired here was more than just policy-making. It was a reaffirmation of commitment, a recognition of the journey that had led to this moment. One figure placed a hand over his heart, a gesture steeped in meaning. It was not merely an expression of gratitude, but a deeper acknowledgement of the respect that had been exchanged throughout the meeting. This was not just about agreements on paper, it was about trust, about ensuring that words translated into action, and that the promises made within these walls would carry weight beyond them. The other responded in his own signature manner, direct, assured, and unmistakably confident. A small but meaningful gesture conveyed appreciation, a silent but powerful confirmation that the discussion had not just been productive, but deeply significant. These moments, though fleeting, held more weight than any written statement. Surrounding them, aides and officials remained poised, their expressions measured yet subtly reflective of the atmosphere in the room. They had witnessed the complexities of diplomacy unfold firsthand, the careful navigation of differences, and the reinforcement of shared goals. The significance of what had been discussed was clear to all, but in these final moments it was no longer about technicalities or policy language. It was about the human connection that underscored international relations. As steps were taken toward the door, there was a mutual pause, a final exchange of words that carried the weight of commitment. Promises were reaffirmed, not as political necessities, but as a testament to the vision shared between two nations that sought to build something greater together. It was not just about economics or defense, but about the larger idea of partnership, one that would extend far beyond this room. Outside, the world waited. Cameras were positioned, journalists prepared their questions, and analysts stood ready to dissect every detail of what had transpired. Yet, in these last few moments, away from the public eye, there was a quiet understanding that diplomacy was more than just negotiations and agreements. It was about relationships, about the ability to see beyond immediate interests and recognize the potential of what could be achieved together. With a final, resolute exchange, the meeting came to its natural conclusion. The past had been acknowledged, the present had been debated, and the future had been shaped. And as the doors opened, the weight of the discussions lingered, not just as words spoken in a historic room, but as decisions that would ripple across continents, shaping policies, economies, and the very course of global affairs. The discussion shifted naturally, moving from formal pleasantries to the heart of the matter, economic ties. The room, steeped in the weight of past negotiations and historic decisions, became the stage for a conversation that could redefine the balance of trade between two of the world's most influential economies. The air buzzed with quiet intensity as the topic of commerce took center stage, an issue that had long been both a bridge and a battleground. The leader seated at the grand desk leaned forward slightly, his expression focused, his words deliberate. He spoke of trade imbalances, of numbers that had been scrutinized and debated. His voice carried the weight of policy, statistics, and the interests of industries that spanned continents. The message was clear. Adjustments were needed, barriers had to be reconsidered, and opportunities for more balanced exchanges had to be pursued. On the opposite side, an equally determined voice countered with precision. There was no hesitation, no wavering in conviction. The argument was laid out in firm yet diplomatic tones: mutual growth, shared investments, and the expansion of markets. There was a vision, one where industries could thrive without the constraints of heavy tariffs and restrictive policies. It was a vision of innovation, technology transfer, and the fostering of an economic partnership that could withstand the shifting tides of global commerce. Numbers were exchanged, projections debated. The conversation was not just about immediate gains, but about the long-term trajectory of two economies that had become increasingly intertwined. The need for fairness was emphasized, but so was the necessity of recognizing the strengths that each side brought to the table. One side highlighted concerns over deficits, while the other underscored the importance of access and collaboration. The stakes were high, but the opportunity was undeniable. Beyond the carefully worded statements and the diplomatic precision, there was a deeper undertone, one of strategic positioning. Global supply chains were evolving, and partnerships needed to be recalibrated to reflect the changing landscape. The rise of emerging markets, the shifting nature of manufacturing hubs, and the increasing reliance on technology-driven industries all played a role in shaping this conversation. It was not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about securing economic resilience for years to come. Investment became another focal point, the potential for capital flow, the promise of expanding industrial footprints, and the benefits of opening doors to greater financial cooperation were all discussed with a sense of urgency. Infrastructure, digital transformation, and the movement of skilled professionals formed a critical part of the exchange. The discussion transcended mere trade. It touched upon the future of business itself, the innovations that could drive growth, and the new frontiers that could be explored together. Each point was met with careful consideration, measured nods, and subtle shifts in tone. This was not just a policy debate, it was a negotiation of trust. Every commitment, every concession carried implications that would ripple across economies and industries. The weight of expectations from businesses, workers, and investors loomed over the room, adding layers of complexity to the dialogue. The conversation continued, ebbing and flowing between points of agreement and areas of contention. Yet, beneath it all, there was an unspoken recognition of the potential that lay ahead. The challenge was clear, but so was the opportunity. The words exchanged in this room would not just define policies, they would shape markets, influence industries, and set the course for economic cooperation that would extend far beyond these walls. The conversation shifted seamlessly, moving beyond trade and economics to a topic of critical importance: security and defense. The weight of global challenges loomed large in the room, demanding attention and decisive action. The walls of this historic setting had borne witness to countless discussions of war and peace, of alliances forged and tested. Today was no different. With measured words, the need for strengthened cooperation in defense was laid out. The world was evolving. Threats were becoming more complex, and security strategies had to adapt. The dialogue was not just about individual interests, but about the larger responsibility to maintain stability in an increasingly unpredictable geopolitical landscape. Military collaborations, intelligence sharing, and the modernization of defense capabilities were at the forefront of the discussion. On one side, a firm stance was presented on the necessity of a strong strategic partnership. Security concerns extended beyond national borders, and no single entity could tackle these challenges alone. Terrorism, cyber warfare, and regional conflicts were no longer isolated issues. They were interconnected threats that required coordinated efforts. The focus was clear: stronger defense ties, increased interoperability between forces, and a commitment to mutual security. From the other side of the table, there was agreement, but also a perspective grounded in history and regional realities. Security was not just about military might, it was about diplomacy, intelligence, and the ability to respond proactively rather than reactively. The importance of counterterrorism efforts was underscored, with an emphasis on sharing critical intelligence and preventing threats before they could materialize. Defense technology, arms agreements, and military training programs were all discussed with precision, as each side weighed the benefits of deeper collaboration. The role of global defense alliances entered the conversation, with discussions on how cooperation in multinational frameworks could strengthen security efforts. The conversation turned to the future of defense procurement, the transfer of military technology, and the expansion of joint exercises designed to improve coordination and readiness. Acknowledgement was given to past agreements, but the focus remained firmly on the need to evolve, to expand, and to meet the challenges of tomorrow with unwavering commitment. Beyond traditional military concerns, the growing threat of cyber warfare was highlighted. The battlefield had shifted. It was no longer just about land, air, and sea. Digital warfare, data security, and the protection of critical infrastructure had become just as vital as physical defenses. Cybersecurity strategies were discussed, in depth, with recognition that securing digital networks was as crucial as securing borders. The idea of shared intelligence, rapid response teams, and coordinated cyber defense strategies took center stage. The conversation then touched on regional security concerns. Stability in critical regions was a shared interest, and neither side could afford to ignore the shifting dynamics of power and influence. Strategic positioning, military presence, and cooperative efforts to ensure peace were all carefully considered. The importance of freedom of navigation, the security of trade routes, and the role of defense agreements in maintaining regional balance were examined with careful deliberation. There was an understanding that military collaboration was not just about weapons and war. It was about deterrence, about ensuring that conflicts could be prevented before they escalated. Peace through strength was an underlying theme, with the belief that strong alliances and well-equipped forces could serve as a powerful deterrent against aggression. As the dialogue continued, there was a recognition that this was more than just an exchange of policies and agreements. It was about a long-term vision, one where security and defense were not just national concerns but shared responsibilities. The commitment to cooperation was evident, as both sides acknowledged the necessity of standing together against common threats, adapting to new challenges, and ensuring that security remained a pillar of the partnership being reinforced within these walls. As the doors to the historic room swung open, the echoes of the discussion still lingered in the air. Every word spoken, every gesture exchanged, had carried weight beyond the confines of those four walls. The meeting had not just been an exercise in diplomacy, but a reaffirmation of the evolving partnership between two global powers, a partnership shaped by shared interests, mutual respect, and the undeniable force of cooperation. The significance of this encounter extended far beyond the individuals present. It was not just about two leaders sitting across from each other, negotiating policies and agreements. It was about the millions they represented, the industries that relied on economic ties, the security forces that depended on strategic collaboration, and the citizens whose lives would be shaped by the decisions made in that room. This was diplomacy in its most tangible form, where the future was not just discussed but actively shaped. The conversation had navigated complex topics, from trade imbalances to defense strategies, from economic investments to counter-terrorism efforts. Each subject had carried its own set of challenges and opportunities, and both sides had approached them with a mix of pragmatism and vision. It was clear that while differences existed, the broader goal of strengthening ties and forging a resilient alliance had taken precedence. A firm handshake had set the tone for the meeting, and now as the discussions came to an end, the final exchange of words reinforced the spirit in which this dialogue had taken place. The commitment to progress was evident, not just in the agreements reached, but in the tone of understanding and trust that had developed over the course of the discussion. This was more than a political engagement. It was a moment that reflected the long history of partnership between the two nations and the promise of a future built on cooperation. As the figures stepped beyond the private setting of their meeting, the world watched closely. Analysts would dissect their body language, reporters would craft their narratives, and citizens would look for signs of what this meeting meant for their futures. Yet, beyond the immediate headlines and diplomatic statements, there was a deeper truth. Global partnerships were not forged in a single conversation, nor were they defined by any one agreement. They were built through consistent effort, through moments like this, where dialogue replaced division and collaboration took precedence over conflict. As the motorcades prepared to depart and the final words were spoken, there was an unspoken understanding that this was not an end, but a continuation. The discussions held today would shape the policies of tomorrow. The agreements reached would lay the groundwork for new economic opportunities, stronger security frameworks, and a diplomatic relationship that would extend far beyond this single meeting. The weight of history had been present in the room, but so too had the promise of the future. And as the doors closed behind them, what remained was not just the memory of a meeting, but the foundation of a partnership that would continue to evolve, shaping the course of global affairs for years to come.